Thanks so much. Thanks, Dominic and Frank and your staff for having me back here again. This morning we're going to talk about Giuseppe Garibaldi. I don't know how familiar everybody is with his life. It's regrettable. If you study this guy's life, the first thing that will come into your mind is, why hasn't there been a movie made of this guy's story? I mean, I would say probably a rough estimate, maybe 1% of the Italian Americans across the country even know who he is. But they all know Tony Soprano, and they all know The Godfather, and fictitious things like that. And his story is so beyond. You'd have trouble selling this to Hollywood by the fact that they wouldn't believe that one man did all the things that he did. So there was an Italian series starring Franco Nero. I believe it was in the 70s, and it's called Il Generale, and it was about Garibaldi. And a friend of mine, Mike Beccarella, some of you might know him, he was an actor, spent a lot of time in Hollywood. And I used to ask him, why doesn't Hollywood take this story up? And he told me, from all the experience in Hollywood, that the American public would reject it because they're not used to seeing Italians cast in this type of role. You know, a military hero who was worshipped around the world. That's how popular he was. We have a statue, like most major cities. We have a statue of Garibaldi. Can you flip this over? Yeah. Whoops, that one. In Chicago, and it used to be in Lincoln Park. That's it over there. And what's very interesting about this statue, most people who do know Garibaldi know him as a military leader. But the statue doesn't look like a military leader, does it? I mean, he doesn't have a sword. He's not, usually when you see a military leader raising a sword, he's not wearing a uniform. He's standing there in coarse plain clothes with his arms crossed. Maybe he's thinking about his strategy for the next battle, or maybe he's reflecting on his life as he stands there idle, a life that was anything but idle, the definition of the opposite of idle. And that statue was originally in Lincoln Park, and it was sculpted by a New York artist named Victor Gherardi, and Gherardi, yeah, with a G-H, Gherardi.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
And on the base, he wrote, "Vorreggiava per remediare, non per conquistare." He fought to help, not to, because he never raised his sword for any other purpose except for fight for freedom and liberty and justice. That's all he ever did. He was so well known throughout the world. In 1861, President Lincoln, during when the Civil War began, offered him a post of office of general in the Civil War. And the reason he turned it down was, he said Lincoln had to first declare the abolition of slavery as the main purpose of the war. Well, the purpose of the war for Lincoln was to restore the Union, right? He didn't get around to emancipation several years later. So that was the reason why Garibaldi could not fight for what was just the internal civil war over political or slavery differences. If the purpose of the war was to abolish slavery, then he would be happy to raise his sword. But his name became so popular, and you can tell when somebody in popular culture gains an enormous amount of fame is they start using his name for articles that have nothing to do with him. And there's a type of fish called the Garibaldi fish. And it's a red fish. We're going to identify Garibaldi with the color red very much. And not red meaning communist, although he leaned in that direction. But the color of his uniforms were red. There's something called the Garibaldi biscuit, and that was a hardtack thing that his men used to eat. When back in the 19th century, if you wanted a nickname an Italian waiter, you used Garibaldi. Like if you're sitting at the table and you had service, you look at the waiter, "Hey Garibaldi," like hey Tony, they say Garibaldi because Italian people back then identified Garibaldi. And there's a cocktail called the Garibaldi cocktail, and it's red, obviously. So, yeah, I mean, that's how you can see his name spread pretty much throughout the world. During the Civil War, although Garibaldi didn't participate in the American Civil War, there was a regiment called the Garibaldi Guard, and they kind of dressed like Garibaldi's men and everything like that, and they emulated him in that way. I wanted to mention just quickly, because it's always struck me, Giuseppe Verdi, his wife Giuseppina Strepponi, she referred to Garibaldi as the purest definition of a hero ever created. And that's how he was viewed. When he went to London, visited London in 1864, it remains the largest turnout. There was 500,000 people came out to see him. The largest reception ever given to a foreign visitor to London. The only thing that kind of dampened it, he didn't speak English. And he tried to give a speech in English, and nobody understood a word he said. But it ended with such thunderous applause because they're just so happy that he came there. So he, in his career, he had a ton of occupations, different phases of his life. He was foremost and first, if you had to describe him outside of being a freedom fighter, guerrilla fighter, a sailor. That's where his heart was. If he wanted to be anything, it would have been a sailor. That's what he started life as, and that's what a lot of his career was about to see. But he also, in the course of his life, became a school teacher at one point. He was a factory worker at one point. He was a merchant mariner for a great deal of the points. He was a farmer for a while. So he had, he was in the Roman or the Italian Parliament for a while, although he rarely attended. And when he did attend, he made a lot of noise and then left. But yeah, he had a very, very, very varied life. So before we can go on, can we see the next slide?
Miguel, Michael.
Who are you?
Oh,
I don't know.
my God, Don, don't take that personally.
No.
Michael,
Michael, yeah,
can
okay.
we do the next slide?
You guys came out too early.
Casa Italia. Now, is everybody aware of the situation of Italy around the early 19th century?
Looking around the room somewhat, yeah.
Well, you know, Italy, unlike, really distinguished from most of the other countries in Europe, that they all eventually coalesced into a single nation, usually a kingdom. France, Spain, England, of course, Russia. A couple of them never quite did, and one was Germany that stayed fragmented, but another was Italy, and they both have reasons why. And Italy had, I don't know if you want to call it one of the reasons why, the fortune or misfortune of having the Pope there and the head of the Catholic Church, and that contributed a great deal for why it stayed fragmented, but there are 1,000 reasons why it stayed fragmented. And the rise of the city-states, you know, because of Italy's geographic location, you all know about how the city-states became so wealthy after the Crusades. They were the gate through which all the goods of the Middle East passed through Italy. And so you had individual families, and by extension the cities they come, making, you know, they were like Bill Gates back then, for the amount of money they made monopolizing the trade. Ironically, what broke that was when another Italian went to the Orient by sailing west on the Atlantic, and we all know who that guy was, right? And that contributed a great deal to breaking the Italian monopoly. But it stayed fragmented. And the Italians, being their character, if, let's say, France invaded Milan, who would Venice support, Milan or the French? Come on, who do you think? The French, all right? They hated each other. They were rivals with each other. And this drove some, I'll mention one guy, and his name's usually not associated with this topic. It has, unfortunately, a very bad reputation, Niccolo Machiavelli. And if you read, he was really a patriot. If you read The Prince, he ends it by calling on Italy to unite. And because it was just around his time that the foreign invasion started. And Italy started to lose its independence. Because when you divide yourself, these other kingdoms are united, you know, and Italy was really great pickings. This was, it was the university seat of Europe, the greatest universities in Europe. Copernicus, who revolutionized it, that's where he studied. He went to Italy. All of the great scholars, to prize like going to Harvard, oh, I'm going to Italy. The wealth that they accumulated, the sophistication. Do you ever wonder why Shakespeare, how many of his plays are set in Italy, right? I mean, there's so many of them, and that's because Italy was like this really exotic, that's who sets the trends, everything like that. So that was the place we're gonna take some place over, that's where we're going. That's who's got the riches. That brought an end to the Renaissance. When the French invaded, the Spanish invaded, and they're more interested, instead of maintaining the universities and maintaining the progress, the art and science progress, of just squeezing the country for what they could squeeze. So Italy entered its modern dark ages, and the universities were known not for their great scholarship, but more for their age, how old they are. And the great seats of learning were moved up to Northern Europe, and that's what it was. So everybody grabbed the chunk that they could. There was just one, that little corner up there, that's Piemonte, okay? They used to sometimes call it the Kingdom of Sardinia, and that's because after the one particular peace settlement, they got the island of Sardinia, and they were not kings, and there was a House of Savoy. House of Savoy was the oldest noble dynasty in Europe, dating back to the 12th century, and it still was. When it finally ended in 1946, it was the oldest existing dynasty. They were dukes, they weren't kings, but at first they took over Sicily, and that was the Kingdom of Sicily. So when they were given Sicily, they got to call themselves kings. There's a kingdom. But then they traded Sicily for Sardinia, believe it or not, and they called it the Kingdom of Sardinia. But it was the Kingdom of Piemonte. I mean, that's where the capital was Torino. That's what they all were. So when people say Sardinia, it's not quite accurate to call it Sardinia. Anyway, the rest of the territory, Napoleon completely shaped it off. We know what happened with Napoleon, right? Napoleon Bonaparte was born in Corsica. His name was Napoleone Bonaparte. His father was Carlo Bonaparte. His mother was Letizia Ramolino. So let's guess their ethnicity, right? But the Genovese owned Corsica, and they sold it to the French the year Napoleon was born. So he was born a French citizen. That's how he's associated with France. When he became the head of France, he invaded Italy really quickly. And what he did when he invaded Italy, because the French Revolution had come on the principles of what? Liberty, fraternity, and equality, right? And to abolish egalite, and to abolish the monarchies, and give people a constitution, civil rights, civic rights, things like that. So what Napoleon did when he invaded Italy, as we all know, he came like a hot knife through butter, and he overthrew all these things. He set up republics, Alpine Republic, Padana, all these different ones like that. In Naples became the Parthenopean Republic, and they were all granted constitutions for the first time, and legal civil rights and things like that, political rights. Well, Napoleon was eventually, as we all know, defeated, right, at Waterloo. And when he was defeated, following that, they had the Treaty of Vienna, or the Council of Vienna. We sit down, redrew the maps of Europe, and everything went back to the way it was, right? So the problem is, when you introduce people to this way of a free life, and then try to reimpose the oppressive ways of Aristotle, it doesn't stay. Now they want to return to that. So almost immediately there started to be rebellions everywhere. And in Italy, a group arose called the Carbonari. Does everybody know they're mostly young university student, people like that. And they started to form secret clubs all over Italy and try to sponsor insurrections. But they were not organized, and there was no direction outside of throwing a bomb here or there. And that was the state of Italy around the time. Garibaldi was born
1805. 1805.
1807.
Oh, seven.
Yeah, July 4th.
4th July.
July 4th, 1807. It was an interesting year. You see, really quickly, we'll just go over it. Where Lombardia and Venezia, those are, Veneto, that's part of Austria. They're not even, so they're actually part of the Austrian Empire. Trentino is definitely part of Austria, as is Istria. When we come down and there's a couple little states, Parma, Modena, those belong to Austria. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany, Toscana, that is ruled by Leopold, who is Austrian. Then there's Papal States, that's ruled by the Pope. Then we come to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, they call that. And it was originally two separate, there's Naples and Sicily. The tragically unfortunate thing about the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, almost since the 7th century, they've always had a foreign ruler. The Aragon, the Normans, or whatever. They never had a Neapolitan king. Even up to the time when Garibaldi invaded, there were the Spanish Bourbons who were ruling Naples, okay? And there's a saying that they used to say in Naples that I think is kind of really tragic of, some of you may have heard this, of the situation, how they came to terms with it. And it was, o Francia o Spagna, basta che si mangia. What does that mean? That means either France or Spain, as long as we can eat. He said, I don't give it down to controlling us, as long as we get. But that's how they had been beaten down to accept that. Now, did that mean that they liked it? Well, the Sicilians didn't. Man, every chance the Sicilians could get to rebel, they did. And they were brutally suppressed by the Bourbons, brutally suppressed. Right? One of the kings was known as Ferdinando Il Re Bomba. That means the bomb king, because he actually shelled Sicily with his own people, shelled them to keep them down from the shore with guns, cannons. And then we had, like I mentioned before, the Parthenopean Republic arose, and they rebelled against him, but then he was restored to power. His biggest ally was the Papal States, Ferdinando. And they used to say, the kingdom of the Two Sicilies, 3 sides of its coast is salt water, and 1 side is holy water. Because of the location of that. So let's go back to Garibaldi, with poor Garibaldi. He was born, his father Domenico, and his mother is Maria Rosa, and they came from a long, long line. They're born in Nizza. Now Nizza, today we know is Nice, part of France. But at this time it was really Genoa, part of the Ligurian coast. It was an important seaport. So him and his father and grandfather, they had been merchant mariners, and water was everywhere. So that's what you did there, it was a major port. And Garibaldi, when he was born, all of the boys in the family just became sailors. But Garibaldi's mother wanted him to be a priest. And the reason was, that's really ironic, because he was a big enemy of the Catholic Church. He was a very gentle little boy. He was very good-hearted, mild-hearted. He once was playing with a grasshopper, and the grasshopper's leg broke, and he cried for a week. I mean, he had such a soft heart and such a kind nature that his mother said, this kid should be a priest. But she sent him to study for that, but he didn't like it. And when he was 15, he went to sea. He became a cabin boy, and then he attended a maritime school and got his seaman credentials, which meant he could have an office position on a boat, and went to sea. Now, while he was sailing, his first ship was a Clorinda that he was first mate on that, and they went to Marseille in France to pick up a bunch of exiles from the dangerous subversive sect that were going to be transferred to Constantinople. And this group was called the Saint Simonians. It was actually a real mild group. I don't know why it was subversive, but they believed in equality for all gender, all races, everything like that, and promoted opportunities for everybody. This was called subversive at that time. But as first mate, he had some free time and he talked to them, find out what they're all about, and this really put an impression on him. And he was wondering to himself, well, what's wrong with this? Why are they being exiled? This sounds wonderful what they espouse. And that kind of opened his eyes a little bit. He was able to see different ports, different languages and things like this, but it's really made an impression on him. So they dropped these guys off in Constantinople, and then they went on to Russia to deliver. They were carrying out crates of oranges from Italy to Russia, and he was walking down the street in the port, and his ears pick up Italian being spoken. And he walks into a bar, and there's one young man, his name is Giovanni Battista Cuneo, and he's giving a speech to a bunch of other Italian guys about the society called Young Italy, Giovane Italia, and a very impassioned speech. And their goal is to throw all the foreigners out of Italy and unite it as a single nation. Italy hadn't been a single political entity since when? The Roman Empire, right? Because the Romans, when Rome became a state on its own, I think in the 2nd century BC, or what do they say now, BCE, the Romans recognized the kinship of all the inhabitants of the Italians that they called Italians. And if you lived there, I don't care if you were north, south, wherever you were a Roman citizen. Since then was the thing like we saw with the division and everything. And that's what the speech was, this guy. And remember Giovane Italia, that slave? That's Garibaldi as a young sailor. Okay, we'll get there in a second. And that's the port of Nizza there. This was a society created by a man named Giuseppe Mazzini. Now, do we know who Mazzini was? Okay, Mazzini was a heck of a man. He was a philosopher. His dad was a doctor. He was born in Genoa. He was a ferocious advocate for uniting Italy, but as a republic. That was his thing. No compromise. Italy's going to unite, it's going to be a republic. There was different theories about uniting. There was another Cesare Balbo was one, and there was Gioberti was another one. They thought the best way to unite Italy would be a confederation of independent states with the Pope as the leader, okay? I mean, it was the idea that they came up with. There are different theories of how we're going to do this. But Cuneo was lecturing in favor of Mazzini, and Garibaldi pulls up a chair and sits down. He's listening. I got to meet this guy. So after he's done talking, he introduced himself. And he says, you know, are you interested in joining Giovanni Italia? He says, I am. He said, okay. Your ship's going back to Marseille. Huh? He said, yeah. Well, I'm going to be back there too. I'll introduce you to Mazzini. Because Mazzini was in exile in Marseille, in France. He's always in exile, this poor man. Always in exile, whether it's London or whatever, Switzerland, because he's Piemontese. Genoa is part of Piemontese, and we don't want any speaking of a republic. This is a monarchy. All right? It's incredible how this all works out. So he does. Can you see the next slide? That's Mazzini. And that's him inducting Garibaldi into the Giovane Italia Society. So Mazzini says, you're Piemontese, Genovese, I've got a job for you. What we're going to do, I want you to enlist in the Royal Piemontese Navy. All right, you, and you, and you, and you, and you. And we're going to have an insurrection. What we're doing, I'm organizing a bunch of guys who are going to invade Piemonte from Sicily. They want to overturn the monarchy. And meanwhile, we've got guys in our group who've infiltrated the Royal Army. And when the invasion starts, you guys are going to cause a revolution in the Navy and the Army, neutralize the Piemontese defenses, and we're going to overthrow the king and declare this a republic. All right? So that's what they do. Garibaldi and a few of his friends and everybody would join the Navy. The name of the ship they're at is called the Eurydice. And at a certain hour when this is supposed to erupt, they take over the ship, but nothing else happens. Nothing else, there's no street fighting, there's nothing, and all of a sudden, I mean, there's 6 guys. And somehow this had leaked, the government knew this was gonna happen. So we got to get out of here. And they managed, a lot of them were arrested. Garibaldi escaped. And he was able to ditch his uniform and find civilian clothes, and he made his way to Nizza, to his mom's house, his parents' house. But he didn't stay because he was a fugitive, and he didn't want to get them in trouble for harboring a fugitive. So he just stayed long enough to get fresh clothes, have a meal, and he split and he went to France. And when he got to France, he bought a newspaper, and he read that he had been condemned to death in absentia. And that made him so proud to see his name in print, that he was recognized as a dangerous subversive who had been condemned to death. Poor guy. But yeah, that was typical Mazzini. How many young lives were lost? I mean, the count is in the thousands of young, devoted students or young people who wanted to liberate Italy and all this stuff, that he would just you go for it, you know, we're gonna overtake it, and it wasn't a good idea. Well, Garibaldi, what did he do? He got out and he joined under the name Giuseppe Pane, that's a fake alias he used, and just got jobs as a normal sailor, but stayed away from Italy. He sailed around the North African coast and things like that. Then he had an opportunity came up for a ship bound for Brazil. And he had learned that there was a lot of Italians in Brazil, all of South America. A lot of them were there for jobs, but a lot of them were political exiles. There's a way to go. You know, what was good about the Italians, what attracted them to Brazil, was Portuguese and Argentina and Spanish were not that far different than Italian, neither was the culture. Whereas opposed to coming to the United States was really different, all right? So that tended to gather why they would go down there. So he went down, sailed down there, and as soon as he got to Brazil, he met a ton of other political exiles. And they're hanging around. How are they going to live? Well, him and 3 or 4 other guys decided, let's open a pasta import company. And that's what they tried to do. But you see this happens to Garibaldi all the time. It was a financial failure. He was a very bad businessman. And right about that time, in Brazil, a province, a big section called the Rio Grande do Sul, and another one called Santa Catarina, they declared their independence from Brazil, and a war broke out. So they heard that, and these people, Santa Catarina and the Rio Grande, they were espousing a republic with all the same things that Mazzini believed in. So naturally, these guys go, this is a great way to fill our time. Let's go join the revolution. And they do. And they fought, and that's where Garibaldi started to learn how to fight guerrilla warfare. And that's where he started to adapt the very South American look. That's why when we see him, he's wearing a poncho, right? You look and watching you look like you know a lot about Garibaldi.
Well, I used to teach about it too.
You used to teach, really? Yeah.
She knows a lot about everything.
No, I
She's an
don't.
entire professor from Loyola.
Are you really?
She's an endowed, was an
Oh,
endowed
you're,
professor.
well, good for you. Good for you. I'm embarrassed to be speaking.
No, this is fascinating.
Sit down.
My background's mostly in literature, so I had to foreground this to give context to the literature. I'm not a historian. So.
She is a PhD from
Stop
Brown.
it, Ellis, stop it.
So you know then that everything he did had a South American touch to it.
Yes.
He always, even when he was fighting the Italian wars, they had South American saddles they would ride. I mean, they were very lean to that direction. Anyway, I've got to find this one thing because it's just so enchanting. Or maybe I'll just tell it. They appoint him, because of his sailor background, to harass the Brazilian Navy. And he's sailing down a river, and he's got his telescope, and he's surveying the shoreline. What does he see? Do you remember what he sees?
So this, I don't know as much about his.
Anita.
This is Anita.
He
Oh.
sees Anita. And I should have had that out there to write in his memoirs how he describes this girl he saw. And she's 17 years old. And his heart just stopped when he saw her. She was on the shore working, hanging laundry up or something. And the way he describes her, I should look that out. It's just so poetic how his heart was just struck. And he pulls ashore and he goes, I gotta meet her. So he just starts talking, you know, who's that girl? And oh, this is her father. You want to meet her? Yeah. And it's her father. Father invites him for coffee. Doesn't mention the girl. His father said, oh, come in and have coffee. And they're sitting there and she comes out. And then he looks at her and he said, Deve essere mia. That means you gotta be mine. And he was, in his youth, he was good looking. He wasn't tall, but he had this light reddish brown hair. His eyes are the most distinguishing feature. He's got these piercing eyes. And she fell in love with him too. And that was one of the greatest love stories, the two of them. Anita da Silva, the last name was, she was Portuguese. What a woman. You know, she joined him wholeheartedly. And after the Rio Grande thing fell apart, they moved to Uruguay and at Montevideo. But while they were fighting in the wars, because there would be another war, she would go right out. You know, she would board the boat with him, and they'd get into a fight with the enemy, and she'd be out there, boom, firing a musket, and he'd say, get downstairs, get down in the hole, but she wouldn't. And then finally, at one point, a cannonball hit, and it killed two guys, and it knocked her off her feet, and Garibaldi said, that's it, you're out of here. He says, I can't fight and watch you at the same time. And this was continual through their whole, and it didn't matter if she was pregnant. She still did that, all right? And that would drive him nuts. And he used to blame her for the few times he would lose a battle, because I was paying too much attention worrying about you know, and you got to stay out of it. But she wouldn't. She had to be by his side all the time. Well, eventually she gets pregnant. They have their first son. The first son is named Menotti, who was named after Ciro Menotti, who was one of Garibaldi's old acquaintances back in his young Italy days, who was martyred for the cause. And so they have this boy. And there they are, riding through the jungles. She's got the baby and a sling around her neck, you know. The little boy, it's a miracle he survived, because they're living in camps in the heat, mosquitoes and everything, and he's carrying this little boy. Well, after the Rio Grande campaign ends, and it didn't end successfully, that's when they moved to Montevideo in Uruguay. Now Uruguay, the biggest, even today, the biggest ethnic population of Uruguay is what? Italian. Do you know that? It's super, super Italian, because a lot of immigrants went there. They call it the Switzerland of South America, because it's probably the most prosperous and stable country down there, Uruguay. And at that time, while they were there, they tried to live a peaceful life. They didn't have a lot of money, and that's where Garibaldi, for an income, they were renting a one-room little house. He started teaching math. He got a job as a teacher, but didn't pay a lot. But they were living in this little, they had a shared kitchen, was pretty poor. But then Uruguay, we got into a war with Argentina, and Garibaldi was already pretty famous, so he was offered a commission with the Uruguayan army, which paid a lot more than the school teacher's job, which is why he took it. And he was put in charge of the Uruguayan Navy. It consisted of 2 boats. That's all it was. And that's when he went to war with Argentina. And that's the glorious foundation of his army of the Redcoats, and who were the Redshirts. And who the Redshirts were, he put them together. They were a group of Italian political exiles, and they formed a guerrilla band, and he began to master the techniques of a guerrilla fighter. They didn't have a lot of money, they didn't have a lot of ammunition, anything like that, so they had to rely on stealth tactics and things. And they were plodding along. They didn't have a uniform. They finally did get their uniform when they found out a wholesale merchant had this bunch of butcher smocks, because butcher smocks were red to hide the blood, okay? And the guy said, can't get rid of these. You want them? And he said, yeah, I'll take them. So they passed them out, and they all wore these smocks, but they put a black belt on. They were on their own for their pants and everything else, boots, but they had the red thing that identified them. And they were going along, fighting these guerrilla tactics. Then came the Battle of San Antonio. And the Battle of San Antonio, they defeated the Argentine force, so it was 5 times their size. It was just a miracle. They held up in an abandoned hacienda, and they were just totally, the main reason they won was the Argentine commander was just so incompetent, and actually was a pretty good victory for them, but news of that spread all over. If you look that up, the Battle of San Antonio, if you go down there, there's monuments of that. Mazzini learned about it, because they would keep in touch with him. And he blew this up. He was publishing a newspaper, and he made sure everybody in Italy knew about these Redshirts, these Republican, who defeated the Argentines, this glorious battle and everything like that. So that made Garibaldi, the Uruguayans, promoted him to general, and became General Garibaldi, and his fame and everything got real big. Then came, he's already a celebrity in Europe, thanks to Mazzini, 1848. All right, historians know what happened in 1848 in Europe.
Republican.
Everything went up. And you know where it started? Yeah, it started in Sicily in January. The Sicilians had enough. You know, the poor Sicilians, here's where you feel far from. The king was in Naples. Can we go to the next slide?
Yep.
I'm talking so much I forget. That's Anita. See her there?
Oh,
That's the girl he fell in love with. That's him on the horse when they were fighting the Argentines, but that's when the Redshirts were found. And that's the Battle of San Antonio over there. Sicily was like the unwanted stepchild of the Kingdom of Naples, or the government in Naples. All of the money, and they were pretty advanced. In this sense, I would say the Kingdom of Naples, or the city of Naples, they were the first city in Italy to have a railroad, 1839. They were the first city in Italy to establish telegraph communications. They were the first city in Italy to have streetlights. I mean, they were really advanced in so many ways. But the unfortunate thing was, this was only for the middle and upper classes. The lower classes lived in unbelievable poverty, just unbelievable poverty. And it's real, to me, it's just interesting that how they were such two different dichotomy things here of whatever, but Sicily was the first to go. I mean, they had all these things going on in Napoli that they refused to do for the Sicilians. The Sicilians were good for tax revenue, and that was it. You're on your own. So the Sicilians rose up, they had enough, and they actually threw the Neapolitans out, temporarily, the Bourbon troops. And then boom, here, boom, here, boom, here. Rebellions all over. Vienna, rebellion. Prussia, rebellion. France, rebellion. It's like 1968 was here. The whole thing went up. So when Garibaldi and his men learned this stuff's going on, they said, let's go back and take part. Can I see the next slide? There's the rebellions going on. Now, interestingly, the different tricolors, the one on the end, what's that, the Trinacria, the symbol, that was the Sicilian thing. They're all raised, wherever the rebellion was, they raised green, white, and red. And green, white, and red became the symbol of the independence movement, the unification movement, and the flags all were different shapes and everything, and different emblems, yes.
Isn't that related to the French flag?
Absolutely, 100%. Because when Napoleon, remember we were talking about when he came down and established the republics, those republics all produced flags that were similar to the French flag. They picked green. You know, you see on the internet is hateful. It's, you know, the stuff you read, things, and Facebook, they're hateful. They put so much misinformation out. And there are things about what the flag stands for. And they say, green represents this and that, and mozzarella and basil. What they represent. And I got this from the Italian government. Green was the color of nature. That's why they replaced that. And there was a regiment in the Cispadane Republic, the National Guard. They wore green uniforms. And so that's where they believe green came from, not from basil or something stupid like that.
Who's the other one? Yeah.
Who's the next one? Okay. Now, one place to avoid, yes.
I was educated by the nuns. They said green is so, faith, hope, and charity.
No.
No, that's in Dante, bro.
No.
It's in Dante.
White is a purity of the cause, red is for blood.
Okay, the nuns told me
Yes.
traditional.
Yeah.
The nuns told me faith, hope, and charity.
Yeah, there's been so many interpretations of it, but that's actually where it came from. It was a revolutionary banner, is what it stood for. One place in Italy didn't have a revolution, and that was Piemonte. And that was thanks to the guy on the right, and it doesn't look like most pictures see of him, or the guy on the left up there, because he doesn't look, this is him as a young man, when he was a young man. That's Camillo Benso di Cavour, okay?
Well, he was way better looking when he was young.
Well, you saw him when he was old, he was a little older.
Yeah,
That's him as a young student, young law student, Cavour. The guy on there, that's the king of Piemonte, his name's Carlo Alberto, all right? Well, Cavour was a genius, and he had started a newspaper called Il Risorgimento. It was the name of the movement. It became the name of the entire independence movement. It started out as the name of the newspaper he founded, Il Risorgimento. He convinced the king, you don't want a revolution? Here's what you gotta do. You gotta become a constitutional monarch. No more absolute monarch. You gotta give the people a constitution. You gotta give them free rights, the right to vote, right to representative government, parliament instead of ruled by decree, that type of thing. And because he was smart enough to see which way the wind was blowing, he did. And they formed that Statuto Albertino. And next thing he did, he changed the kingdom's flag to that. He adopted the tricolor, and he put the House of Savoy emblem in the center. And that, of course, we know became the Italian flag with the Kingdom of Italy. So he went full guns on the side of the Republic, or the Constitution, everything like that. And that precluded a revolution in Piemonte. Milan and Venice, which were part of the Austrian Empire, rebelled. They had revolutions. And the Milanese actually threw the Austrian garrison out of the town. They all rolled up. They called it Quattro Giornate, the 5 days or 4 days, where they overthrew, put barricades in the street, chased all the Austrian garrison out, and declared Milan a republic. Okay? Venice, the same thing. It was under Daniel Manin. Threw the Austrians out, because everybody's throwing their oppressors out, and declared the Republic of Venice, where Venice had actually been a republic for most of its history, right? So Carlo Alberto is under pressure. Should he take a small but well-organized army and go to war against the Austrians to protect, because the Austrians were sending their army under General Marshal Radetzky to take Venice and Milan back. And their army, Austria, yeah, today you think of Austria, what, the Sound of Music, you don't think of it. But back then, Austria was one of the major powers of Europe. There was Austria, there was Prussia, there was France. Those are the big heavy shooters, right? They're a big power. So Carlo Alberto decides, yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna liberate the Milanese, and then hopefully the Venice. That was what they call the First War of Italian Independence. So he mobilized his army, and they were very well trained, well organized, the Royal Piemontese army, but they were no match for the Austrians. So if they're gonna win, they had to win fast and quick. And they're also hoping that people from all over Italy would come. And this was really interesting. People are rebelling all over. They have a rebellion in Naples. They forced Ferdinando to do what he did with Carlo Alberto. We want a constitution, and we want you to take the army and go up north and join Carlo Alberto and free those cities. And then the pressure started on the Pope. The Romans wanted to demonstrate, and then volunteers are pouring in from all over. So Garibaldi comes, he wants to join. Now they kind of forgot about his death sentence because he had been such a big hero now that they weren't going to risk that. But he wanted to join the army, and they said, no, we really don't need you here. And to Carlo Alberto, he said, well, you got to make use of me. And they thought, well, this guy's really popular. He probably would be great for getting volunteers and recruits, let's use him as recruitment power. But they didn't want him to fight, because this victory was going to be a Piemontese victory of the Royal Army. It's not going to be these Republican scum, right? That's how they thought of him. So they said, all right, Garibaldi, here's what you can do. We're going to put you behind the lines, and you're on our side, behind the front, and you're going to be a trainer. You're going to be training soldiers. Okay, that pissed him off. He didn't want to do it, he wanted to fight. So they reluctantly kind of let him on, but stay back, and he just went off on his own. And he started to organize his own people, and they started to fight war in Rome. He would always win, whatever he fought. So the Pope sends, first Ferdinando sends 20,000 troops marching north, and he tells them, take your time. Don't rush to get up there, because he's looking for a way out, because he doesn't want to provoke the Austrians, because the Austrians are a great ally of his. And the Pope is thinking, you know, the Austrians are Catholic. Do I really want to do this? I don't want to do this. So the Pope has got 10,000 troops marching over. He recalls them. Come on back. I don't want you guys to do this. A lot of his soldiers said, screw you, we're still going. And then they went, General Duran did that. And that gave Ferdinand his excuse to pull his men. Well, the Pope's not doing it, I'm not doing it either. And he pulled his men back. And Carlo Alberto was depending on this assistance to help him win, and that all fell apart after that, and it totally crumbled. So poor Carlo Alberto, he called for an armistice, and that lasted a few months to regroup, and then he restarted the fight, and this time he was really beat. And he didn't want to surrender, so what did he do? He abdicated, and he stepped down. In his place, his son came, who was an entirely different personality. His son was Vittorio Emanuele II, Victor Emmanuel II, and he was an entirely different personality. Where Carlo Alberto, they used to call him Ray Tantana, he was uncertain, he never knew what to do, shouldn't I, you know, it was like that. His son was entirely different. His son was purposeful, determined, much more gregarious, much more outgoing. So his son signed a peace treaty with Austria, and one of the Austrian demands was you have to repeal your constitution and go back to being an absolute monarch, so they could restore that type of thing. And he said, absolutely not. We're keeping the constitution, and he refused to do that. He also had to disarm and everything like that. He went along with that. The Cavour is such a genius to see how they got out of that. Anyway, so Garibaldi is toying with the idea, should I go to Venice and help them? When all of a sudden, he gets a telegram saying, there's been a revolution in Rome. They've overthrown the Pope, and Rome was declared a republic. Okay, now, you gotta let that sink in. When we think of Rome being eternal, the Pope's life in there, actually, he escaped in the middle of the night. They said you could, this Pope Pius IX, he started out as a liberal, Giovanni Ferretti. Everybody thought it was a new day. He was a young Pope, he was in his 50s. And he allowed the streetlights. His predecessor, Gregory, said absolutely not. We're staying in the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. He allowed the railroad. He allowed newspapers. Everybody's saying, gee, it's a new day, you know? But after he recalled his troops from fighting for that, because that's when people like Cesare Balbo and Ghiberti and all of them who wanted the Pope to lead it, they had hoped that he was going to, but he said, no, I can't do that. My role is for all Catholics, regardless of nationality. I can't be partial to the Italians. So then they started to demand, okay, that's fine, but we want a representative government in the Papal States. And he kind of went along with that, but wishy-washy, and you know, the more you feed people, the more they want. And finally, he couldn't do their demands, so he rose up to actually attack the Papal Palace, a group of people, and his life, he felt, was in danger. They murdered Pellegrino Rossi, that was his Secretary of State. He was a real jerk, nobody liked him.
So that was okay.
No, yeah, he was a very arch conservative. I mean, just, they say, Beato la mano che ha pugnato Rossi. Blessed is the hand that killed Rossi. So the Pope escapes in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, dressed as a priest. Gets on board the carriage, and they go to Gaeta, the Kingdom of Naples. And that's where he self-imposed exile there. And they telegraph Mazzini 3 words, Roma Repubblica Vieni. Okay, Rome's Republic come. So he comes there and he immediately becomes president of the Republic. And the Pope down there in Gaeta calls all the Catholic nations of Europe to come and restore them to power, temporal power. Garibaldi comes, and because the French say, that was Louis Napoleon, was the president of the French Republic. And this one was so scandalous, because, you know, after I keep on going back and forth. France was a republic under Napoleon, then became an empire, and then was a kingdom again under Louis Philippe, And then it would become a republic after 1848, right? With Louis Napoleon, who was nephew of the old Napoleon the Great, as its president. And the Catholics in this country are really pressuring him to get involved. And he's trying to work out a coalition government, and he needs the Catholics, and so he says, all right, and he decides to send 10,000 troops to defeat the Republic and bring the Pope back. So when this book comes out, Garibaldi changes direction, and they come to Rome. And that's a great scene when he shows up at Rome with his Redshirts. And everybody was, who are these guys? Because they all come riding in. His aide-de-camp is this big, giant black guy. He was a former slave that Garibaldi freed in South America. Andrea Aguilar, his name is. And he was like, nobody ever saw anything like this guy. And they all had these wild plumes in their helmets and their hats, and colorful garb, red shirt, ponchos, just didn't fit in. And we thought they were a bunch of briganti, you know, that's what they look like. But they all come to Rome, they were defended against the French. The French were under General Oudinot, 10,000 French, and they landed at Civitavecchia. And after a few days, they started to march towards Rome. And Garibaldi organized the defense. The first battle, guess who won? Garibaldi chased the French back to Civitavecchia. And this was just, oh my God, who's this guy? And so for the next several months, this is what went on. Mazzini didn't want to fight the French. So what he did, he set up big signs, like billboards, all the way on the road to Spain, so the French soldiers would see it. A fellow republic should never attack another republic. We're like you, we're a republic, you know. And some soldiers, one of the soldiers he captured, Garibaldi, when they brought him inside the gates of Rome, they fed him dinner and wine and played music for him. And so I said, we're not your enemies, we're like you, you know. Go back and tell the other soldiers, they let them all go, that we stand for the same thing you guys do, and it didn't work. You know, a lot of the guys felt that way, but what are you gonna do? Well, this went on for, you know, it was a siege. They were holding out, and a lot of guys were killed. A lot of what Garibaldi did outside of Rome, in the suburbs, there are these villas, you know, that people would grow vineyards and things. He made sure to take all of them. So his troops were all over the place, and they would sabotage, or not sabotage, you know, I'm losing my mind, you know what I mean.
Guerrilla warfare?
Huh? Yeah, it was all very guerrilla warfare.
Like snipers. Okay.
And he was, you know, holding the French back. It was just miraculous how well he was doing it. Then volunteers were coming from, there was Americans, there were Polish, a lot of Polish volunteers came from Poland, was rebellion. Then there was a group of Bersaglieri. Does anybody know what Bersaglieri is? Was he? God bless him. Bersaglieri, there were special forces in the Italian army, they're still to this day. The Bersaglieri is a marksman, and they were known for their agility. They never march, they run. Okay? And under this young guy, Luciano Manara, they came to fight with Garibaldi on his side against the French. And what was interesting about them, they're all monarchists. They're from Piemonte, the Royal Piemontese Army. So when they would end a speech, Mazzini would rise and would, Viva la Repubblica! And they would not say anything. They wouldn't join in, but they stayed to fight because they're monarchists. It came to the point, well then I should mention, the Bourbons invade from the south. And Garibaldi's out to take care of this in half a day. And they go down there, and there's probably, again, 8,000 to 9,000 Bourbon troops. And he turned them around in half a day, sent them fleeing back. They went back to fight the French, and the guy was just incredible. And you know who was killed in that war?
Not me.
Huh?
Not me.
Mameli. Alfredo Mameli. You know who he is? Young poet. He was 21 years old. He's the guy who wrote Fratelli d'Italia. L'Italia si resta d'amore, scippo cent'anni e mezzo. Yeah. He was there, the guy there. A lot of other people. There's, pardon me?
Oh, I didn't know that he was killed in that.
Yeah, he was killed.
Wow.
There was another woman, Teresa Tivolucci Belgioioso. She was incredible, this woman, incredible. She went down there to fight. She came from a royal family, or a noble family, but she joined the cause for Risorgimento. I mean, why aren't people know this stuff? This woman, you could write a movie on her too. She went down to the thing. She not only fought, took up arms, but she was in charge of all the hospitals for the wounded soldiers, that she organized all of that. There were so many great people who participated. A lot of Americans did, because they loved the idea of a republic, and they're very anti-papist, Americans were. Well, it got to the point that Oudinot had strengthened, if I go on too long, tell me.
No.
Oudinot had strengthened his troop, another 10,000 soldiers, and the Romans were running out of ammunition, they were running out of food, and they proposed we surrender to the French. Garibaldi says, I'm not surrendering. I'll leave the city before I surrender. And that's ultimately what he did. He had about 1,000 guys who wanted to go with him, and dead of night they went out the east gate, which was not covered that well. Oh, Anita showed up. Somehow she got in. He said, what are you doing here? But she said, I want to be here. So I said, all right. And she's 6 months pregnant. All right. And he goes, all right, stay out of the fighting. They sneak out the dead of night, and they're going down these roads and wandering around, and their proposal is, Venice is still holding out. Let's see if we can make our way up to Venice. And along the way, people are dropping out, because they march at night, and they stay still during the day, and then they march at night. When you march, you couldn't talk louder than a whisper, you couldn't smoke a cigar, because the light of a cigar might give you away. And by that time, there was 40,000 French, there was 20,000 Austrians, and 9,000 Spanish that were, mission was find him in his group. They took Rome, by the way, but Mazzini and all the leaders are all condemned to death, but a lot of them escaped. And the Pope came back. Now when the Pope came back, he completely changed. All that liberal stuff went out the window, and everything went back. You know, I learned my lesson. You know, you give these people an inch, and they take a mile. You know, we're not dealing with this anymore. So Rome went back to the way it was, and Garibaldi is working his way up, and the Austrians find him, and they're having skirmishes along the way. They finally find refuge in San Marino. And they stay in San Marino for a while, but San Marinese, they didn't really want them there, because it's kind of putting them in hot water, so they quietly leave there, and they say, we're going to go to Venice. And what they do is there's a little seaport that had fishing boats, a little fishing village. It wasn't a seaport, it was a fishing village near Ravenna. And they were all going to meet there, rendezvous there, leave in separate groups, they weren't so huge. And then we're going to commandeer these fishing boats, and we're going to make our way to Venice. But that fell apart. When they all got there, nobody showed up, or they showed up in the wrong space, and it broke down to him, one of his aides, and Anita were alone. So they got on a boat, and she's starting to get a fever. She doesn't feel good. Really high fever, not feeling good, can barely walk. And then came the time she couldn't walk. So they're carrying her and Caliendo in the swamps of Comacchio, and they find a peasant's house, and they knock on the door, and he says, my wife is here, and she's really sick, put her in bed. And he said, take care of her, and I'll be back. And she got real upset. Tu vuoi lasciarmi? You want to leave me? You know. So he said, okay, okay. He sat there holding her hand, and then she died. And he was so grief-stricken. They had to pry him away from her body. He wouldn't leave her. She was 6 months pregnant. So Caliendo said to him, you know, you gotta leave, not for your sake, but for Italy's sake. You won't be captured. We need you. So very reluctantly he left. And they slowly made their way. They were trying to make their way back to Piemonte, the two of them. And they were fortunate enough that the guys whose house they were in, he was a Republican, and he had friends all across the area, and they quickly established a network. We got Garibaldi coming through, give him whatever he needs. So he made his way, him and Caliendo. Finally they got into Tuscany, which that was under Leopold in Austria. They weren't that severe. He was still under arrest, wanted. And there's one scene where they enter a small inn at night, and him and Caliendo sit down, and there's a candle at the table, and they look, the waitress comes up to them, and she looks at them, and she goes like this. They look, and there's 6 Austrian soldiers sitting it there, and they're, uh-oh. And she walks up to the Austrians and she said, "Get out of here." And she said, "What are you guys doing here?" And they said, "We're here to capture the notorious bandit Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was supposed to be somewhere in the area." And Garibaldi was like, this, puts his head down. It's like he's sleeping. And so she starts to flirt with them and play with them to get their attention off her. And when they see what she's doing, they quietly get up with their company to leave. That's a harrowing part of their stuff. Like that happened all the way through. They finally make it back to Piemonte. And the Piemontese government says, "Welcome back, but I think you better get out of here because you're welcome, but not really. You're too much heat." And so he takes the hint. And him and Culiolo, they stayed really close partners. They go to Tunisia, and they're the Piemontese consul in Tunisia, and they meet a guy named, I forget his name. He's a very wealthy merchant, and very sympathetic. He knows who Garibaldi is and everything, and he says, "You know, you guys are wandering around. I got a job for you. I want to expand." He's a merchant, sea merchant. "I want to expand my business interests to America. And I can arrange for your passage to America. Here's so much money I'm going to forward. Once you get there, I want you to buy a boat, and you can be a sea merchant, and I'm going to start doing business there." So great. So they arrange for their passage back on a British ship, and they land in New York. Now, New York then was already starting to grow, and largely because of the Irish immigration. Because what happened is, I'm sure you know, in the 1830s, there was a famine in Ireland, and millions were leaving. And those who came to America went right to New York. But the Italian community was very small. And those Italians who were there were craftsmen, artists, you know, because that was a big, and they were mostly Northern Italians. But a lot of political exiles were there too. So he made friends. Everybody was competing with each other who got to let him live at their house because everybody, you know, Garibaldi was famous. So he never had to worry about a meal or anything like that. Everybody was fighting each other over who could host him. But he didn't like that. He wanted to work, so he went to the docks to get a job. And he couldn't be a sea captain because they wouldn't give a captain's brevet unless you were American citizen in America, so that idea went to hell. And he didn't have enough money. The money that Cataneo, his name, wanted to give him was nowhere near enough to buy an American boat. So what am I going to do now? Now, who else was in New York at that time was a genius named Meucci. Right.
You knew something from it.
Antonio Meucci. And Meucci was a Republican at heart, and he was just overflowing with Garibaldi. "Oh, come on, look at me," and everything. And Meucci was the inventor of the telephone. I mean, that is not, he put his caveat $5 because he couldn't afford the patent, way before Bell did. And you know what happened to him? They were dire poor, and his wife couldn't stand him. You know, get a real job. And he got hurt in an accident, and they were facing destitution. So she sold all his stuff to a junk dealer. Everything in his workshop for money. That's how all of that stuff. This guy's name was bad luck, poor Medici, but he was a very creative mind. He had, him and his wife, she was a seamstress, and he was a stage engineer. That's what they did. And he would develop special effects for the stage. You know, Bond was off, and he would develop a way to do that and everything. And their company moved from Italy to Havana. And so they moved to Havana, and then that theater burned down. So the owner of the company took him all to New York to open up there. So that's what he was working for. His wife was still, she was a costume maker. And he tried everything, this guy. But they made a lot of money in Havana because he invented a way to electroplate metal. And all the officers in the Cuban army said, "Oh, could you do my helmet? Could you do my sword?" And he was doing that, and he started a business and made a lot of money. So while they weren't making enough money in the theater, they were still living off all the money they made from that. And he had enough money to buy a house on Staten Island. And he took Garibaldi, come on, everybody, room for everyone. And he brought a bunch of them to Staten Island, they opened up a candle factory, because he invented a way of making candles that didn't smoke. All right? They were smoke-free candles, and that was really successful. He was selling them to churches, selling everything. But he put the Garibaldi to work doing that, and Garibaldi said that was like some of the happiest times of his life. They say he would have his arms in a barrel up to here of wax going up his hands, carrying stuff. And that was special. I should have mentioned, by this time, he started to develop arthritis, really bad. And sometimes he literally couldn't get up. He was so crippled with it. That's a lot from being at sea all those years. Didn't let it get in his way. Still worked. And then when they had time, they would go fishing, hunting, things like that. It was the happiest time of his life. Well, one of them. They had a boat, a little rowboat. They named it the Ugo Bassi. Ugo Bassi was the chaplain of the Redshirts, this poor priest. He was captured by the Austrians and shot. Ugo Bassi. He had a knack for naming stuff after his friends or his enemies, poor Garibaldi. But while he's there, he starts to feel bad. He feels like he's living off of the generosity of Meucci. And who shows up but that merchant who originally sent to America and says, I know, I screwed up, but this deal is good because I need a ship to go to Peru, yeah, because there's a big market for guano. You know what guano is? Okay, it's fertilizer. Yeah, it's fertilizer. It's become the world's most popular fertilizer. So he says, I've got a ship. You don't have to worry about buying a ship, but if you can get down to there, and I've got this shipment is going to China. All right, can you handle that? And he says, oh, sure, I'll do that. Fertilizer, yeah. So he makes his way down there. I'm trying to remember, Lima, Peru. That's where he sails, or makes his way down there. It takes him forever. The trip down there, you had to go all the way down South America, then all the way up the West Coast.
No Panama Canal. No Panama Canal.
No Panama. So he picks up the guano, he goes to China, sails all over, he goes to the Philippines, he's spending time and makes his way back to New York, and he meets one of his old friends. He's always, I'm not giving it justice, because he's always meeting old friends everywhere he goes, from revolutions, everything. And there's one guy who's working as a sailor, a sea captain, and they've got a boat going to Liverpool. He goes, you want to join the crew? And he says, oh yeah, yes I do. And he gets on the boat and they go back and he makes his way to England. And when he's in England, he stays there with the Italian. Everywhere he goes, there's an Italian expat community, everywhere, because they're all around the world. Like Gravity, he finds his way there, and you know, they're all talking about what's going on in Italy. Nothing. These are the dark ages. All the revolutions have been squashed. Venice finally fell. And opportunity maybe will arise so we can go back. And what he notices when he's in England is, although England is a monarchy, there's a parliament, and there's civil rights and all these things. So he's thinking, well, you know, maybe a monarchy isn't that horrible if it's a right monarchy. And this is where he starts to split from Mazzini, because Mazzini's in London too. And Mazzini sees Garibaldi there. He goes, got a great plan. We're gonna have a revolution in Sicily again. And I want you to go down there. And Garibaldi, whoa. Not again. We're not doing this again, you know? And he kind of, because Mazzini had compromised in his republic, never a monarchy. Garibaldi, I'm not so sure. So eventually he finds out in Genoa, or in London, there's a ship bound for Genoa, and he gets on board. And he goes to Genoa, he goes to see his wife and kids. So when they went, I've never mentioned it, he had a bunch more kids with Anita before she died. He had 4 children. And when they went back to Italy, when I mentioned before, they went to his mother's house. And that's where Anita was living before she showed up at Rome. So he stopped there to visit his family and his kids and everything like that. And he got a job as a sailor, merchant mariner, just around there, just stayed around there. Then he finds out his brother dies, his younger brother. Now his younger brother had made a fortune.
What year are we talking about?
This would be 1854.
Okay, it's in the 1850s.
Now we're in the 1850s,
Okay,
I'm sorry.
okay.
Because he's already done the exile to America, and he did sailing around the world for that one guy. And now he's sailing around the Mediterranean again, merchant mariner. Very, if he wanted, I think he could easily have done that for the rest of his life.
What an
Because he-
adventurous life. What an adventurous life.
Oh, yeah, that's why I say, when you read about this guy, why doesn't,
Globetrotting.
forget Tony Soprano, why doesn't every Italian American know about this guy, right? It just, you don't know how that burns me up, all right? Anyway, I won't go down the road. It's a dangerous road for me. His brother dies. His brother made a small fortune importing and exporting olive oil. And he didn't have children or a wife, so he left it all to his siblings. Garibaldi got the equivalent of $30,000. So what he did with that was he went to Sardinia and he bought an island, half of an island. The island is named Caprera. And he said, this is where I'm going to live. His son, the firstborn, Menotti, was 16 years old, so he brought him there, and they built their own house. And they built a whole farmstead. They had a little windmill, a barn, a workshop. He had indoor plumbing, talk about way advanced, yeah. And he was happy there. And everything was like Spanish, looked like a hacienda, you know, going back to that. And a workroom, still there today, you can visit it. I'm going there in September, by the way. I'm going to Caprera. All my life I wanted to see it, and now I'm finally going to do it. And people were coming continuously from all around the world. Admirers coming to talk with him, military people coming to get his advice. So it was a real coming and going. He didn't hurt for social life. It was always there. And being Garibaldi, anybody would come, there's a table, sit down, have dinner, you know, you sit and talk, drink, and everything. And there was one German baroness who really was in love with him. And he had 1 million women. I mean, he was like a rock star. How many girl admirers, British women. The boat that he had to transport supplies from Nice to Caprera was a gift from a wealthy English woman. Just a gift, okay? I mean, he sucked it up too. I mean, he enjoyed it. Meanwhile, what's going on in Italy? Victor Emmanuel III, Cavour, that young guy who's looked at it, and you like how we remember Cavour, he's now prime minister, and this guy is genius, okay? And we're gonna fight that war with Austria again, but we're not gonna be stupid this time. We need a strong ally to help us. We can never face the Austrians on our own. So the Crimean War breaks out. Does everybody know what the Crimean War was? It was a war. Yeah, the Russians invaded Turkish territory, and Britain and France went on the side of Turks to fight the Russians, and most of the fighting took place in the Crimean Peninsula, which is in the Black Sea. And Cavour says, we're going to join that fight on the side of the British and the French. And we said, what are you, nuts? What have we got to do with it? And he said, trust me, trust me. So they send 20,000 Italian troops to fight there. The stars of the show were the Bersaglieri, of course. And the war goes on and on. The biggest killer of that war was not enemy bullets. The biggest killer was, what's that?
Friendly fire. Friendly fire? Friendly fire?
No.
Disease.
Oh, disease.
Disease, it's a disease. And it's not, I'm losing my mind, I'm too old to be doing this.
Was it typhoid?
It's like typhoid. It just, cholera. Cholera.
Bad water.
They lost
Bad water.
tens of thousands of soldiers, not from fighting Russians, just from cholera. This was the biggest thing, it was worse. But the war came to an end, and it came to an end favorably for the British, French, and Sardinians. So they had a peace conference in the settle it, and Italy got to sit at the peace conference, and that's how they referred to themselves. The kingdom, not of Piemonte, not Sardinia, kingdom of Italy. That's what Cavour wanted to be called. And most of what went on the conference didn't concern the Italians, so he just sat there, him and the other delegate, took their time. And then when finally everything was wrapped up, they said, is there any more business? He said, yes. And he brought up the Italian question. And he said, this conference was called to guarantee future peace in Europe. And I'm here to tell you there will never be peace in Europe as long as Italy remains occupied by foreign countries. And, Austria and Italy, they said, we protested, and we objected. I'm just putting it out there. And he knew that Britain and France were there, and they would be happy to see the Austrians destroyed, right? So time passed on, and he made contact, Louis Napoleon made contact with him and said, I've been thinking about what you were saying, and how would you feel if we made a deal, if I helped you throw out the Austrians, and these are the things that I would need. And they met at this French resort called Plombières. And they always called this the Treaty of Plombières, but there was no treaty, nothing was ever signed. And how it arrived, Cavour, it's all top secret, he was supposedly going on a vacation to Switzerland. That was the reason, and he took a train out there, but he actually did a detour in the train, and they went through Plombières, and Napoleon III, he's an emperor now, he got rid of the Republic, now he's not Louis Napoleon, he's Napoleon III. He meets him in a carriage at the train station, and they take him to his quarters in this real elaborate hotel before dignitaries stay. And they spent that day in the carriage, riding around through the streets, whatever, negotiating how would this work. And this is what I want. We'll help you, whatever, defeat the Austrians, and in return, I want the province of Savoy, that's in the northeastern, way on the top, where the House of Savoy originated, and the city of Nice, Garibaldi's hometown. I want those two things. I want my nephew to marry the daughter of Victor Emmanuel, that poor woman, that poor young girl. She was 16 years old, raised strict Catholic, pure as the driven snow. Napoleon's nephew was in his 30s. He had hated religion. He was a gambler, a drinker, womanizer, I mean, everything that she wasn't. And Cavour thinks, oh no. Now this girl, Maria Clotilde, she's the king's favorite child, okay? There's no way he's gonna go along with this. So he said, well, this is really terrible. But okay, all right, we'll see. We'll work on these things. And the other thing he said, I want Garibaldi in this campaign. Napoleon III said, because of what happened in Rome and everything, his army being humiliated by Garibaldi. And Cavour says, don't worry about that. Don't worry about it. We don't want him either. So they make the deal, and Garibaldi learns about this and Caprera, and he decides, I'm going to go. And he goes back again, and Cavour is they're going to declare this war. How are we going to get him in the war? There's the other thing Napoleon said. It can't be us, the aggressors. Austrians have to attack us, or attack you, and then you can call us in a fight, right? That's no problem. We'll get them to attack us. But the thing about the daughter, the king said, oh, no, not my daughter. No. And she thought about it, and then she decided she'd go through with it for Italy. Because he said, I don't want you doing this against your will. And she said, no, I'll do it. And she got married to him. And she was actually beatified by the Catholic Church later on. Because, not only because that she had it was like husband and wife. She lived her whole life. He lived his life. And she was real big with charities and things like that. Maria Clotilde. She's almost a saint, wonderful girl. Anyway, how are we going to get the Austrians to attack us? Well, part of the treaty that they made in the First War was they had to never mobilize, keep their army low profile. And Cavour and Victor Emmanuel, they mobilized the army along the border with Austria. And Austria naturally says, what are you doing?
What year is this now?
Now we're at 1859. And they refuse. And Austria declares war, and Cavour looks at France, okay, here they are. And France comes down, and they've
Just in time.
Now, as the war is going on, it was an ugly, brutal war. They fought the Battle of Solferino, and that war was so incredibly violent and bloody, that battle, I'm sorry, that's where the International Red Cross was founded during that war. And it was a Swiss, Henry Dunant, his name was, who was an observer. and they rushed on the field because there were so many wounded men. And what they did, they took a white flag and with blood, they made a cross on it. And that meant, you know, leave us alone, we're taking care of it. But Napoleon was so horrified by how many men he lost, he made, without the Italians knowing about it, he made a secret deal with the Austrians for a ceasefire. And they worked out peace without Napoleon, or Victoria not even knowing about it. Class would return. So, when they settled the peace war, the Austrians ceded Lombardia to France, and then Napoleon gave it to Italy, and they united that.
Because it couldn't be, yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
So Garibaldi had joined the army, and how he joined the army was they couldn't keep him out for 1,000 reasons, right? Because he's too popular. He was determined to fight. So Cavour relented. The formal generals of the army hated Garibaldi because here was this, he never went to a military academy, right? Rebel, and they were all military academy, did things the right way. So what Cavour said, you can't be the Italian Legion, you've got to be in the army. And they gave him a general's uniform, and so you see there's, can we move on a little bit? I think I'm skipping over a lot of stuff. Yeah, there's a Pope, that's the revolution, go ahead. Go, yeah, okay, that's Garibaldi in the leaving room, that's where Anita, when she's on her deathbed, can we go on? That's Miyuchi, that's the candle factory.
Yeah.
That's that island, you can visit it today.
You can visit it.
Will we go to the next one? That's Caprera, that's his little house, that's, yeah, there he is. There's that shit, can we go to the next one? There he is in his general uniform, see how different he looks? And that's where they're fighting. Deformed, that's Vittorio Emanuele. They call him the Padre della Patria, the father of the home. His group, the organizers called the Cacciatori degli Alpi, that means the hunters of the Alps, that was his regiment. And they actually captured Trentino. But when the peace was settled, they had to give it back, and that drove him nuts, all right? So, can we do the next one? All right. So Garibaldi wants to continue the momentum. Let's not stop now. Now let's go to southern Italy and take them. But no, we're not going that fast. It goes slow. Cavour and Vittorio Emanuele, they were kind of rooting for him, but we're not taking that thing on. But we'll kind of help quietly. So he organized his Italian Legion again. There was a little bit over 1,000. Right? We got a beautiful book there. It has them, and they set sail to Marsala, Sicily. Their ships were supplied by the Rubettino Shipping Company. And now they play a big role in Italian history. I just, real quickly, I'll throw that in. Around that same time, the Rubettino Shipping Company bought land at the bottom of the Red Sea, a port called Assab, okay? Because it was a coaling station for them going down the Red Sea to go to China. And you know what that became? Eritrea. It became the first crown colony. Started with the Rubettino Shipping Company, and then eventually the Italian government, they say, kind of quietly helped finance that to get their foot in Africa. Which, let me add this real quickly before I go before, I'm going all over the place. Garibaldi once said, this is the irony of that, I created Italy, I love Italy, but I will go to war with Italy if it ever attempts to deprive another country of its freedom. That's what Garibaldi said, and that's what they did, obviously, don't they? So we all know what happened with Garibaldi. 1,000 volunteers on no ships, they land at Marsala, and because they had red shirts, the British, who were on the side of the Italians, but not directly, parked a bunch of their vessels right there. And the Bourbons said, uh-oh, look at the red coats. And they politely sent a designation to the British ships and said, are you guys invading us? Because the British were red. No, they're not invading. But then it started. And as we know, I'll just say previously, as they were going, 1,000 grew to 20,000 for all the volunteers along the way that joined the army. They got up into the toe of Italy, worked their way up, and they captured Naples. And the moment it looked like it would be successful, what did Vittorio Emanuele do? They invaded the Papal States. He said, oh, he's winning. Come on, let's get him. Let's get to it. So they go down, and that's what this is up over here. that's the Redshirts flag. That's his entry into Napoli. Then a month later, Vittorio Emanuele reaches him, that's the king, and Garibaldi. And they meet at the village of Tiano, and Garibaldi says, I salute the first king of United Italy. And he gave all that he had conquered to the king. And see, there's a king, and you see Garibaldi putting a boot on his foot. That's a political cartoon. That boot is Italy. See, it's like, maybe, but,
May I interrupt?
yeah,
There's so many things about this guy's life that are intriguing, both personally in his life and politically. In handing over southern Italy to the king, Piemontese at Tiano, I think, which is east of Naples. Do you think that he was a traitor to republicanism? I know that you
No.
suggested.
I was wondering that also.
no,
If I may, I think he was.
that's where, like I was saying, where we saw him separating from Mazzini. Okay, if this was under an absolute monarch, he never would have done it.
He did so in England, you said.
In England, where you started to
Reevaluate.
When he started to
yeah,
reevaluate
it's
his
a monarchy,
position.
for number one. Number two, as a republic, how practical would that have been? I mean, Mazzini was the biggest espouser of that, and what did Mazzini achieve? Nothing. He achieved nothing. These insurrections, everything, every one of them failed, ultimately. The only place in Italy that had an actual army that could fight for this cause was Piemonte. I mean, you had the Neapolitan army, but they were half-hearted about it. And that was one of the reasons why Ferdinando didn't go ahead with fighting the first war when he called his troops back. Because he goes, what happens if it wins? Then who's going to be in charge? My kingdom or his kingdom, right? So you had that conflict, and that was one of the curses of Italy being so divided. I think Garibaldi went with the monarchy because that was, first of all, the monarchy wasn't as bad as the absolute monarchs. It was at least constitutional, and that was the only practical way to unite it. So he accepted that as this was the way to do it. If he would have insisted on staying as a republic, I guarantee it never would have happened. It never would have happened.
Well,
Yeah. Well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate your interpretation. I don't happen to agree with it.
At
I
that
think-
time,
I would like to hear yours, though.
at that time, Disraeli was the prime minister of England. What was his role in the whole thing?
He didn't want to get involved, but who did want to get involved?
He was of Genoese descent, am I mistaken?
You know, England's position was quiet approval, not even for the Republicans, but for the House of Savoy. There was Lord Palmerston before Disraeli, who was very pro Italy, not as a republic, but again, much more liberal than Disraeli. They liked the counterweight against Austria, and they just would have converted Italy state of monarchy, but it was quiet support, and also financial support, quiet. But that's what the British role was. French was a little bit more
Was
direct.
it because they didn't like the papacy? That was-
Absolutely,
Oh, yeah,
that was a
hated
big
paper,
part of
very
it.
hated paper.
That's why the Americans supported it.
Absolutely.
Because they didn't like the papacy. You said your opinion was different, your interpretation? I'd
Well,
like to
instead
hear.
of emphasis, I think that, should I put it, it was a hard pill for him to swallow. He didn't accept, in my view, the Piemontese leadership of the new Italian state. It was a bitter pill to him, so it was a pragmatic decision, and not one based upon
His real change of the
not one based
political heart.
upon his
Yeah.
assessment of the value of the Piedmontese monarchy. It was simply pragmatic.
Well,
I would
absolutely,
agree with you on that.
absolutely pragmatic. I agree with that. Okay, did he embrace the monarchy? He didn't.
Piedmontese monarchy gave away its
Nice.
own
I
country.
And who was hated Kavu for that?
Well, you know, okay, he gave away his own country. That came, he exploded like Mount Vesuvius over that.
Yeah.
When that did him. And
He was explosive.
he burst out against Cavour in Parliament, so hostile, so angry for giving his way. And the king said, look, I gave up Savoy. It's the cradle of my ancestors. You shut up. this is what we had to do. And that's what caused him back off. But he was elected, Garibaldi was elected to represent Naples in Parliament, okay? And can we do the next slide? Oh, this one, that's way ahead, look at that. When he did go to Parliament, they opened up, they declared Italy a nation, the Kingdom of Italy in 61. I believe it was in March.
61.
And then they called the Parliament session, the House of the Chamber of Deputies. Garibaldi was there representing Napoli, and he just exploded for the terms of the French. On top of that, the French had even finished the war. You know, they pulled out before it was over with. And Cavaliere was so shaken, he died. Next year later, it so
What would have
upset.
happened if Cavour lived longer? What would the history of Italy be?
Oh, God, historians have been debating that for.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll say this for Cavour, the man was a genius.
He was
I mean,
he was organized.
Yeah, he was good. If you read about this, I'm sure a lot of you have.
Would there be, what was the rebellion in 1860? When the South rebelled, what do you call that?
Well,
The Civil War in the States.
No, come si chiamava?
What, the Brigantes were?
Briganti.
Yeah,
Would
the
that
five-
have
the
happened?
Briganti?
What they call it, the
They-
5
they-
years.
Cavour
were-
done anything about it?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a rebellion. I mean, we all interpret history different, I guess. One thing I don't like,
Reactionist.
I don't like revisionism.
Yes.
And there's been
A lot.
a big movement now, not now, but it's been going on for a few decades. Suddenly they've elevated the Borbonici, the Bourbons,
Yeah.
to being this great,
Yeah.
wonderful regime, and Garibaldi is this
Yeah.
devil.
Invader.
Yeah, and everything like that. And, you know, you always get that happening, well, this is what really happened. And that just infuriates me. I mean, read all the contemporary accounts. There's nothing good that says about the Bourbon.
Yeah.
As far as Palmerston was big, they visited southern Italy, and he said most of the people don't have enough land to be buried in.
Yeah.
That's how poor they are, uneducated, backwards. This is what represented all the immigrants who came to America. And every negative stereotype we can trace back to the misrule that went on in southern Italy, the lack of education. I mean, people always wonder what the difference between northern and southern Italians. Well, what's the difference, cultural difference? You had one that was a lot more, not good, they still had their problems, but more better educated, more opportunity. That's where Cavour was a genius. How he changed Piemonte when he became powerful in the government. He got rid of tariffs, made free trade. He encouraged, revised banking to make it easier for you to get a business loan. So you could-
Railroads all over Italy. Railroads.
well, yeah, but I mean, yeah, exactly. He built canals, and he traveled to England and he saw how they were doing it there, and he says, "Oh, we got to do it." So he recognizes that first of all, to make Italy strong, we got to make it economically strong. Let's put our money, make it opportunity for people to open businesses, trade, everything like that. He was very progressive in that regard. He was a very loyal monarchist. You know, he wanted. In those times, they didn't even look, this is unifying Italy. Cavour and the king, this is expanding Piemonte, right? What they were really doing. But then by this time, they came to the point, that's what we're doing. This happened, this is at Aspromonte. Does everybody remember? Garibaldi fu ferita ad Aspromonte, or something. It's fu ferita in una gamba. Garibaldi says, we're gonna take Rome now, because only Rome is lacking. And Rome, still, and Venice is still lacking. Still has all those French garrison there, right? And Napoleon III told Vittorio Emanuele, who moved to Torino, capital, moved to Firenze, getting closer to Rome. And he said, you're not going to Rome, not as long as we get there. He said, okay. Garibaldi said, screw that, we're going to Rome. So he organized a legion, and they landed in Sicily, went up the Toe, and they reached Aspromonte in Calabria. And the king sent the Italian army there to stop them because he didn't want a war with France. And poor Garibaldi, the Italian troops started to shoot at his men, and they didn't know where the bullets were coming from, and they saw it was Bersagliere, so the Garibaldi's men started to shoot back. And Garibaldi goes running in front of both sides. Non fa fuoco, non fa fuoco. He didn't want the Italians shooting each other. Boom! He hit the leg. And that was kind of touching. So he shot in the leg. And the commander of the Italian troops comes, takes off his hand, kneels by Garibaldi, picturing, I'm so sorry for what I was following my orders. I didn't want you to get wounded. I mean, it was actually really touching. And so, okay, they disbanded. Poor Garibaldi, it's a surgeon who took care of him. And there he is, real disgusted and bored back at Caprera. He's got to sit down and cool it. Jumping ahead real quick, 1866, Italy goes to war again against Austria. This time their ally is Prussia, and it's sometimes called the 7 Weeks War. It was a real quick war. The aim is to get Venetia back, Venice, and that war is totally disastrous for the Italians, totally disastrous on the ground troops. But Garibaldi joined with the Cacciatore delle Alpi again. He was the only one to win battles. The Italian troops.
How old would he have been at this time?
Oh, in his 50s.
Oh.
So, yeah, he's getting old now.
That was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Not for a soldier, that's not young.
well,
Because he's been through a lot.
he's been through a lot. I mean,
He's starting
his
young.
arthritis is getting really bad
Yeah.
now. He needs help to get on his horse, all right? But, you know, there's 2 battles, Lisa and Custoza, in that war that were just so incredibly awful. You know, Lisa was a sea battle, and the Italian Navy was one of the biggest in the world then. It had a really powerful Navy, but it had really incompetent officers. And the problem with the Italian Army, and a lot of the officers were not good. They were political appointees, you know, people who were noblemen and stuff. And the commander, I can't remember his name, but he just completely screwed that up. He lined up all of his ships like sitting ducks against the Austrians. You know, boom, boom, they sunk all the ships. One of them was the Re d'Italia. It was a ship sunk in the Adriatic. And at Custoza, they were outnumbered and they completely sent him a rout. And so when the war was over, Prussia won. The Prussians refused to give Venezia to the Italians. They gave it to the Prussians. And the Prussians gave it to the Italians. And that's kind of the biggest embarrassment was that war. So, but whatever, we got one. 67, he tries to go to Rome again. He invades Rome, tries to invade Rome, and this time the French are there, and they come out and through a lot of screw-ups, they were defeated again, and he has to go back. Can we see the next slide? Well, that's him in England. I had mentioned the big reception. You got next one? What's next? That's the Third War of Independence. That's him there. This time, he's wearing his red shirt. No more general's uniform. And he's got his red shirts with him. And that's the Piemontese army and the different battles they fought. Next one, please. All right, so we're getting to the end. Does everybody know what happened in 1870, September 20th? They took Rome. What happened was, Franco-Prussian War in 1970. So France had evacuated troops out of Rome. And as soon as he did that, outside, all these Bersaglieri appeared. And at 6 in the morning, the sun's just come up. Boom, one cannon shot. Boom, boom, they start shooting the gates of Rome, those gates. Finally, they made a breach in Porta Pia, and that's what that is. The Bersaglieri came rushing in, it's Porta Pia. And they go to the Campidoglio, you know what the Campidoglio is? It's
City Hall.
take down the papal flag, put up the Italian flag. This is now property of the King of Italy. And Pius, the ninth still Pope, what does he do? He exiles
He
everyone.
excommunicated him.
Excommunicated, not exiled, excommunicated. He told Emmanuel, everybody.
They're all out.
Then he told the Italian citizen, if you so much as vote,
Vote, you're gonna be excommunicated.
you're excommunicated. Can you imagine that? Okay. And when did that end? When did they change that?
The Concordato,
Huh?
The Concord one that when Mussolini came to power, yeah. And that's when they got the Vatican.
See what that
Yeah.
one-sided that was?
Yeah.
Italy had to pay so many billions in
Give them the
compensation. They had to make Catholicism the official religion taught in all schools, and blah, 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 blah. And you know what the Vatican gave Italy? We recognized the Italian state. We recognized legitimacy, and that was worth it, because Italy was an intensely Catholic country. Yeah.
Now they're having a referendum in Italy whether or not they should have a cross in the
I know
classroom.
that, yeah, I know that.
Because there's so many ethnic groups coming in and they don't want a cross.
Well, you know, Cavour was actually the first in Italy to propose separation of church and state. That was one of the things he insisted on, which it should be. In that war, it sent the French out. You know, the French overthrew the empire and overthrew Napoleon to his delight. Oh, I want to mention, when Cavour was at Caprera, he raised goats and donkeys.
Garibaldi, you mean?
Garibaldi.
Garibaldi. And he named them all. Remember I mentioned that? One was named Pio Nono. One was named Charles Odino. There's a French name. One was named Napoleone. He named all of his jackasses after his enemies. With the French gone, with Napoleon gone, France declared a republic. So now he goes to war and decided a republic against the Prussians. And what that scene is down there, that's him and one of his men. They were the only
French army.
ones to capture an enemy flag, were Garibaldi's men
The
in the French war.
only French force
Yeah,
to capture Russian.
right, the only ones to do that. And that's him on his horse in France. Did you see the next slide? There he is, he's an old man. So then he goes back, he retires, he starts writing his memoirs, and everybody living in Caprera now, his kids, everybody's there, the whole family. The woman he would become his third wife, Francesca Armosino, she was like the caretaker and everything. She was there, and he was suffering from bronchitis, arthritis, and you know, like that picture of him, see, there's a line of people waiting to see him on his deathbed. And then he finally he died. They say that a little bird came to his window before he died. And when they were in South America, his second-born child was Rosita, named after his mother, and she died, scarlet fever, at 4 years old. And he got the news when he was fighting a battle that so your daughter died. And that crushed him so badly. So he was dying, and a little bird flew at the landed in the window, and he said that was little Rosita coming to take him home. And so he died.
What did he die?
1882.
No, what killed him then was
So he
it
had,
wounds?
they
or-
say just arthritis, and he had bronchitis, and that's what finally did him in.
75 or something?
Huh?
He was in the 70s?
75. Not that old, you know, but look at him.
Young.
The guy went through so
Couldn't
much,
even
but,
sit up
you know, that, you guys see him with that hat?
Yeah.
Those hats? That was a gift from some woman admirer
Yeah, I know.
who sold it, who sold it for him, and he was for it. Yes.
Yeah, speaking of women admirers, I've often been interested in this guy's personal life.
Oh, yeah.
For example, his second wife,
Yeah.
that he never consummated the marriage because
That was Raimondi, Giuseppe
the
Raimondi.
day of the marriage, a day later, he found out she was pregnant by.
That is such a murky story that,
It took him a lifetime to get the church.
to get an almond. Well, even he had that trouble marrying her because of Anita. Okay, because they thought Anita wasn't dead because nobody ever found her body. And there was no death certificate ever written for Anita. So they said, well, technically you're still married to Anita. And he said, she's dead. Well, how do we know that? We could just be saying that. And that took a long time to do that. And that's when he married Giuseppina Raimondi, a marriage that lasted a few hours, right, before he found out about her being pregnant.
Yes.
Well, not a few hours,
He
but
also had some observation. A couple things. For example, the statue in Lincoln Park was where in October '69, Day of Rage, where the riot, as it were, began. And they chose it specifically because of the brigandage, because of this guerrilla warfare tactics.
exactly.
And also, I can't but think of that connection, there's probably no real connection, but the hippies of the era and how men changed their clothes and facial hair after the French Revolution, growing beards.
Right.
It's sort of an interesting thing, the evolution of male hairstyles in the early 1800s compared to the 1700s where they were clean shaven.
Yeah, well, that's forever changing back and forth. I mean, I think it was McKinley, the first American president then from that era, besides the early era, who started being clean shaven. Because if you look at everybody, certainly Lincoln on, they're all bearded, right?
Also the reality of how difficult it was to shave back then, so
Yeah.
it was an outward sign of being civilized and sophisticated to have a shaved face.
You know why the Romans were clean shaven, the soldiers? That was, you couldn't grow a
Nobody
beard,
could grab her and
so
grab.
nobody could grab them by the beard when they were fighting. And that's why they kept their hair short. If they lost their helmet, nobody could grab them by the hair. That's why
So
they
do you think Garibaldi is a worthy figure to study?
was a what?
A worthy figure to study Italian?
Oh my God, yeah. I think if you're, people who are Italian and don't know about him, that's criminal, in my opinion. You know, and I think what part, not I don't think, I know, a big part of that problem is Italian Americans, by and large, and believe me, I've been dealing with them. I'm 73 years old. I've been dealing with them literally all my life. I first learned about Garibaldi in the 6th grade, and our school library had a book called Garibaldi and His Thousand. And I was in 6th grade, and I thought, oh, who's this? Sounds like he's Italian. I really liked everything Italy, and naturally I went home and asked my dad, who is this guy? My dad told me about him. So I've been dealing with this stuff and promoting Italian knowledge, and I was shocked, because I grew up in a household where we knew about these things, you know? My dad, who I worshiped, was very proud of his Italian heritage, and he was a plumber. He was the 3rd Italian plumber in Chicago. He was the 3rd. Before that, you had to be Irish. You were an Irish community. Was he?
Is he a union plumber?
He was a union
Yeah,
plumber,
that's what I'm saying.
absolutely.
You weren't a plumber unless you
You
were
were in
good.
union.
Anyway, I used to go to him, and he used to tell me all about this stuff, and I assumed all the other Italian kids knew this stuff. And so I would go and talk to everybody, nobody knew what I was talking about. And, you know, their introduction to Italian culture was Topo Gigio on Ed Sullivan Show, okay? Or Louis Prima, whatever his name is, Lou Monti singing Dominic the Donkey. This is their introduction to Italian culture. Now, because they didn't know this stuff, it's shocking to me. You have a vacuum, and Hollywood filled that vacuum with all the wrong things, So you've got this pervasive, profound ignorance out there that I've been dealing with. Marty, and Marty's the director of the band. Our band is, I mean, I'm not ashamed to say this, mostly composed of non-Italian musicians. And we are been promoting this pure, untouchable, 50,000 times greater, more beautiful, melodious, ingenious arrangement by these Italian composers that no other country can begin to compete with, but nobody knows about them because the way it is, I mean, everything's German composers and everything. And we can't get an Italian kid to pick up an instrument and help preserve this stuff. And we've been doing this since the 70s. That is just one aspect of what we've been dealing with these people out there. I mean, if we started a club for Chaz Palminteri, they'd all be joining, all right? So because we had that vacuum, you allowed Hollywood to fill it. And I mean, it really, to me, is insidious. And things like this, which should be fundamental, and it stabs me in the heart because I know a lot of young Greek kids that they all know about, believe me, Socrates, they all know about the glories of ancient Greece.
Polish people, yeah.
You know, Polish even more.
Yeah,
And
for
what
sure.
an embarrassment it is to me when I think here you are, you've got the greatest heritage that everybody wishes that they could have, and you're wallowing in this crap.
So why is that?
Why is that? It's just like I said, now unfortunately, yeah, we could talk for a million years on this one. It was, they came over here when Italians were looked down upon,
Yeah.
but they came from southern Italy, where most of them were
oppressed.
Oh,
It-
well,
it- it didn't-
uneducated?
Uneducated. They didn't know what this was. They didn't even consider themselves Italians. They considered themselves whatever they were, Calabrese, brothers. I hear this a lot when Italian American people say, I don't speak Italian because my parents discouraged us to speak Italian. They didn't teach it the same old way. And I say, if you really wanted to learn it, you'll learn it. Now, my father didn't teach me
Can I,
Italian.
before Pietro leaves, can I give a shout out to him? Yeah, Pietro Lorenzini is a historian and PhD in history, and he specializes in Italian history, so, yeah. Yeah.
I apologize, I have to go. So
Go.
I really appreciate it.
We're
Facebook friends, no, I just wanted
appreciated your
to,
presentation, which was a difficult one.
I'm glad we finally meet
yeah.
because I've been Facebook friends for,
No, I just wanted, because I
I didn't know that was him.
yeah, I wanted to just give him a shout out, because he's awesome, and he
I know.
teaches a lot of this with his students too.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
glad.
yeah.
We've been Facebook friends forever, but I never met him in real life.
It'd be
Thank
fun
you
to
for
see
that.
your bands. You play often?
Fantastic things happen when you come to
Casa
Casa
Italia,
Italia.
We
yay!
play strictly we used to play a lot more for different events, but now we used to concerts and
10
things.
times, 9, 10 times through the year.
But mostly our venues is the Italian Feast, the few that are left.
We're just-
And every year it gets thinner and thinner and
You were at the
thinner.
Chayama, weren't you?
I'm
Did you
sorry?
play at the Chayama?
Yes.
Yeah, Chayama.
Mauro Butterito, Mauro Butterito.
Oh, yeah.
Maradona di Butterito.
Yeah, we play there
Yeah, I remember.
every year.
October.
Yeah, we were there, yeah, I remember we were listening, it was amazing.
Our biggest is always Melrose Park,
Yeah,
and there's St. Rocco's and Barrio Chinatown.
so
Well,
we need to,
you'll have to let us know or reach out to you on Facebook because we would like to go.
Oh, would you like to?
Maybe drag her son with us.
I gotta
Does your
make
son
more
play-
Italian out of it, yeah.
Does he play an instrument?
He played trumpet for many years, and he was very good.
How old is he?
Bring him in.
He's 25 now.
Oh,
Good age.
I would love to get him.
Please,
I have a
please.
Facebook page of the
I will
band.
do that.
You do?
yeah,
We
no.
need to,
Can
maybe
we
Dominic
have
wants to wrap it up, so we do.
Yeah, well, we want to
Tell you my name.
thank John for
Yes,
Yeah.
sharing with us all of this information. You'll have to come back and do stick around, everyone. We can probably make some more coffee. Maybe we can send out for pizza or something.
Can I just ask, I want to first of all say, wow, I wish I had known you before, because I would have loved for you to come in and do this presentation for the
I've
class.
been around.
I know, but, my background is in literature, so I know this, I'm not a historian, just to give students the context and of what's going on with different things, and it is so complicated. I am just in awe of all the facts and dates, and I used to tell my students, I said, well, we have the American Revolution, which happened like once.
We had
I'm
four.
saying, you're talking about the Risorgimento, you have 4, maybe 5 if you go all the way up to,
Yeah, that's what I told you. We had one war of independence.
Yeah.
They had the first war of
And
independence.
then there's the second, and
war.
then the third. And then the other thing I talk about is like who are like this idea of founding fathers, if you want to say. You have Mazzini, Cavour, and Garibaldi,
The
3
time
men who
waited.
didn't even necessarily like each other at different points.
Which made it very difficult.
But it wouldn't have happened without each of them. So I used to use a metaphor. I would say, well, Mazzini was the spirit. He had no practical, but he had, he was the one with the big spirit. And Cavour was the brains, because he really was the one who knew how to be diplomatic and pull all the cards. And then Garibaldi was the heart. He's the one who
It
put
was the sword.
Yeah, and the sword. But I'd like to give them, but I always feel that my students are always so sad for Garibaldi. They're like, he lost his homeland, like Nice isn't even part of the United Italy, and then his own army shot him in the foot, and then. So-
Nice is was part of Italia Chicago, which was parts of Europe that they wanted back to get some
Yeah.
and Nizza and Corsica, because even to this day, Corsica is Italian,
Yes.
really culturally. And Nizza probably not so much anymore, because it's a very international port, but there were, Marty mentioned, the Garibaldi. Everybody know the Garibaldi? It opens up with the coolest words at the beginning, is si scoprono le tombe, si levano I morti, I martiri nostri sono tutti risorti, con spade nel pugno, I lauri alla chioma, la fiamma del nome, Italia sul cuore. Isn't that beautiful? That's Garibaldi said.
Two comments about language. First, I grew up in an Italian-American neighborhood in Chicago. And my mom was born in Sicily, of course, and she.
Where was your,
Siracusa.
Siracusa, but where was your
Where all the Greeks,
Where
right?
was your name?
Yeah.
Taylor Street?
In what?
In Chicago.
Taylor Street. I grew up right on Taylor, Our Lady of Pompeii. I loved it. Okay. The point is that the Americans would accept people from Italy speaking with the dialect, with an accent, okay? But if you're born in America, they want you to speak like an American. And that's why they refrained from teaching us the Italian language. And it wasn't taught in the schools either.
Oh, of course, I went to school.
And the second point, far away from that, about 15 years ago, I went to the Savoy Hotel in London quite a few times, and doing business with Lloyd's. And the Savoy is known for like Italians all over. The Italians work there.
Right.
And who's checking in behind me? Luciano Pavarotti. So I turn around and say, Luciano, como se va? That's all I said. He goes, Chicago. And he gave me a hug. Okay, and just the way I said como se va, he knew where I was from.
You know,